don't come today. Sarah doesn't feel comfortable with you and Mom being there. That one message. On my son's wedding morning. Not because the drive was too long. Not because my wife's health couldn't handle it. But because our presence, mine and my wife's, was being treated like an embarrassment. Like something that needed to be hidden away before the guests arrived. I stood in the hallway, my shirt still half tucked, and I asked myself one question. When did I raise a son who forgot where he came from? But before I tell you what happened after that message, take a moment to subscribe to this channel and drop a comment telling me where you're listening from today. Your support here is what keeps these real stories going all the way to the end. Now let me tell you exactly what happened next. That morning started like any other important day in my life. Quietly, carefully, with intention. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and buttoned my shirt slowly, the dark gray one. The one my son Daniel once told me made me look more put together than most men half my age. I don't remember the last time he said something kind like that, but I kept that shirt. I kept it hanging right in front of everything else. That's the thing about fathers. We hold on to the small good moments much longer than we probably should. Margaret was still in the bedroom when I finished. She came out holding the door frame gently, steadying herself the way she had learned to do after months of treatment. The light blue dress she had picked out 3 days earlier was pressed and perfect. Still had the fold lines from the hanger. She had been so careful with it. I watched her smooth it down with both hands, and I saw something in her face I hadn't seen in a long time. Real happiness, not the kind she performs for other people, the real kind. The quiet kind that shows up in the eyes before the smile even forms. She was thinking about sitting in the family row, about watching her son walk forward, about being a mother at her son's wedding. I thought for just that one moment that this was going to be a good day. Then my phone moved on the counter. One short vibration. No alarm, no call, just a message. Daniel's name on the screen. I picked it up slowly. Dad, please don't come today. Jennifer's family is not comfortable having you and Mom here. I already told everyone you're both traveling. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be. I read it once. Then I read it again. The way I used to read technical documents at work when something didn't add up, looking for a detail I might have missed, waiting for a second message that would explain it differently. Nothing came. Margaret looked at me from across the room. She didn't ask anything out loud. She just looked. After 42 years together, she has never needed many words to know when something has shifted in the air between us. I folded the phone face down and set it on the dresser. For about 30 seconds, I thought about smiling and saying nothing, protecting her from it for just a little longer. But she has always known. She has always been able to feel the weight before I say a single word. What happened, she asked. Her voice was low, steady in the way that only comes from someone who has already faced much harder things than a bad morning. I didn't answer right away. I walked to the wooden cabinet in the corner of the room, the one where we keep the documents that matter, birth certificates, property papers, the things you file away and only open when life asks you to. Inside, behind everything else, was a thick envelope I had prepared 2 weeks earlier. A wedding gift, not money, not jewelry, the deed to the lake house, the property I had spent the better part of my working life paying off and protecting. I had always imagined handing it to Daniel one day with one simple message. This came from somewhere. Don't forget that. I placed the envelope on the table and left it closed. Then I sat down and told Margaret what the message said. She didn't fall apart, not the way I expected. She lowered herself into the chair beside me and held the edge of her dress in both hands. I watched her breathing slow down the way it does when she is steadying herself from the inside. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said softly, "Maybe he's just overwhelmed with everything." I nodded. I wanted to believe that too. I genuinely did. But something else had already started pulling at the back of my mind. A different kind of problem, quieter but colder. I picked up my tablet and opened the joint account, the one I had handed over to Daniel about 18 months earlier, because managing the day-to-day transfers had become easier with him involved. I had trusted him completely. That had never felt like a risk worth questioning. I am not the kind of man who goes looking for problems. I believe in order. I believe that when systems are built correctly and the right people are placed in the right positions, things run the way they are supposed to. That belief had served me well in my career. It had built us a comfortable life, but that morning I scrolled through the account slowly. Numbers I didn't recognize. Transaction after transaction. Payments to a high-end event company. Multiple times. Spread across the last 4 months. Each one large enough to pause at. All of them together adding up to something that made the room feel different. I stopped scrolling when the total became clear. $230,000. I didn't move for a moment. I went back and checked the dates. Every payment had been made during the same period when Daniel kept calling to tell me the wedding would be small, intimate, just close family and a few friends. Nothing extravagant, nothing that needed much planning. I set the tablet down on the table beside the envelope. The clock on the wall was the only sound in the room. Margaret looked at me again. "Is there something else?" she asked. I put my hand on the envelope, then I pulled it back. The question I was sitting with was no longer about why my son was ashamed of us. That question had already settled into something I could carry. The question I couldn't shake was different. When did my trust become the budget for my own removal? After Margaret went to rest, I stayed in the living room alone. The envelope sat on the table untouched. The tablet was dark. The room was very quiet. I am an engineer by training. 31 years in the field. When something shows a problem, the first response is never to react emotionally. The first response is to assess, to understand the full picture before making a single move. I made a cup of tea, sat at the table, and wrote everything down on paper, every transaction, every date, every amount. When it was all laid out in front of me, the pattern was clear. Nothing had been hidden badly. It had simply never been questioned, because I had never looked. Then I called Robert. Robert and I have been close since we were young men with nothing but ambition and bad coffee. He became a lawyer, the kind who doesn't ask unnecessary questions. The kind you call when clarity matters more than comfort. I told him I needed him to look at some documents, right now. We connected on a video call. I shared what I had found. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for longer than usual. Then he said, "There are a few things you need to know about." He walked me through a mortgage agreement. One I had signed electronically about 10 months earlier while I was away for work. A document that had used the lake house, Margaret's favorite place, the place that smelled like pine and good memories, as collateral for an investment. The beneficiary listed was not Daniel. It was Mr. Harrington, Jennifer's father. I asked Robert if the agreement was still valid. He said yes, but he also said I still had standing to reverse it if I moved quickly. I didn't feel rage. I want to be honest about that. What I felt was something more precise. The feeling of a man who realizes that a slow drift has been happening for a long time, and he was the last one in the room to see it clearly. Robert asked me one question before we ended the call. "What do you want to protect?" I looked toward the hallway where Margaret was resting. "My wife's peace," I said, "and after that, I want my own authority back." The call ended. I sat for another few minutes. Then I picked up the phone and made 3 calls. The first was to the bank. My voice was calm. I requested an immediate freeze on all premium cards under my name that Daniel had been using. I confirmed the cancellation of all pending payments to the event company. No explanation was asked for. It was my right. I had simply never used it before. The second call was to the property management office. The lake house was returned to full and sole ownership under my name. No dispute, no drama. Just the quiet correction of something that should never have moved. The third call I made was short, just a confirmation to Robert that everything was done. I sat back. No shouting, no accusations, no broken furniture or slammed doors. Just 3 phone calls and everything was back where it belonged, and I understood something in that stillness. Real control does not need noise to work. Margaret came back into the room as I was finishing the last call. She sat beside me. I told her only what she needed to hear. The important parts, the clear parts. She listened without interrupting. When I was done, she looked at me for a long moment. "Are we going?" she asked. I thought about it. I thought about the message from that morning. About being asked to disappear so that someone else's event could feel cleaner. About all the years of showing up quietly, in the background, making sure everything held together. And I thought about something simpler. If I didn't go today, I might never truly be present in my son's life again. Not in any real way. "Yes," I said, "but not the way they planned." We got ready without rushing. Margaret changed her shoes. I straightened my collar. I picked up the envelope from the table and held it for a moment. I was not bringing it to give away. I was bringing it to remind myself that some things, when offered to the wrong people at the wrong time, stop being gifts. They become tools used to make you invisible. We left the house in silence. I didn't turn on the radio during the drive. I let the quiet stay. I wasn't building up to anything dramatic. I was simply organizing my thoughts the way I always did before a decision that couldn't be undone. If the truth was going to come out today, then it would come out under their lights, in their room, in front of all their carefully selected guests. And once those doors opened, none of us would be able to walk anything back. The venue was exactly what $230,000 looks like when someone else is spending your money. Manicured hedges, soft lighting designed to make everyone look more important than they felt. Staff moving in straight lines. The kind of place that signals wealth loudly while pretending to be effortless about it. I parked in the side lot, not because there wasn't space, because I didn't want to announce our arrival before I was ready. Margaret held my hand as we walked inside. Her grip was steady, so was mine. The room was full of faces I didn't know. Daniel's oldest friends, the ones who had eaten dinner at our table for years, were almost completely absent. The people here were different. Quick smiles, careful handshakes, eyes that measured you in about 4 seconds before deciding how much of their attention you were worth. I guided Margaret to a chair near the aisle, not because she was tired, because I wanted her to have something solid behind her. Then I stood and looked at the room the way I'd learned to look at job sites, quietly, completely, without giving away what I was seeing. Jennifer was on the far side of the room. Her dress caught the light the way expensive things do. She stood in a circle of people, laughing easily. I caught pieces of the conversation from where I stood. Honeymoon locations, business expansion, a family trip to Italy. Then one sentence stopped me. Jennifer said lightly, to no one in particular, "Daniel's parents couldn't make it today. They're traveling. Honestly, it's probably easier this way. Not everyone is suited to events like this." A few people smiled. No one asked anything more. I didn't move. I didn't need to. Some words settled their own score eventually. My phone moved in my pocket. A message from Robert. The event company just called. "Payments declined. They're looking for you." I typed back 2 words. "I'm here." 4 minutes later, a man in a dark suit came to find me. He leaned in and spoke quietly. There was a payment issue. The ceremony couldn't proceed until it was resolved. He apologized for the inconvenience. I told him I would take care of it. The music stopped, not with a crash, just a slow fade that left the room without something to fill the silence. Conversation softened, heads turned. The host at the front of the room stood with a carefully neutral expression, waiting. I walked forward, not fast, not slow. The walk of a man who has already made his decision and is simply arriving at the moment where it becomes real. I didn't take the microphone dramatically. I just stood where the room could see me, and I spoke at a volume that didn't need amplifying. "I'm sorry for the interruption. There are a few things that need to be addressed before we continue." I looked at Daniel. He was standing beside Jennifer at the front. His face had gone pale. He didn't step toward me. He didn't step back. He just stood there, caught between 2 directions, not sure which one was safer. "I am the account holder listed on the contract for this event," I said. "And this morning I discovered that several decisions were made in my name, financially and personally, without my knowledge or agreement." Jennifer turned sharply to Daniel. I could see her lips moving but couldn't hear the words. Whatever she said made his hands open and close at his sides. "I want to be direct about one thing," I continued, looking toward the Harrington family in the front row. "My son is free to build whatever life he chooses, but he does not have the right to use my trust to write me and his mother out of his own story." Mr. Harrington stood up. He was the kind of man who had spent his life controlling rooms through reputation. He began to speak about misunderstandings, about temporary financial arrangements, about the importance of both families working together. Smooth, practiced, the kind of speech that makes problems sound smaller than they are. I listened until he was finished. Then I placed a folder on the table at the front of the room. If this was truly a misunderstanding, then these documents wouldn't exist. Inside the folder were the confirmations Robert had sent that morning. The repossession notice for the apartment Daniel lived in, registered under my company. The cancellation of the vehicle arrangement. The reversal of the lake house collateral agreement. Everything printed, everything dated, everything clean. Daniel looked at the papers for a long moment. Then he looked at me. "Dad," just the one word, nothing after it. I gave the room a moment to settle before I spoke again. "I gave you a great deal," I said to him. "Resources, responsibility, trust, everything I had built. But there is one thing I never gave you permission to do. I never gave you permission to treat your parents like something to be hidden." Jennifer let out a short sound, not quite a laugh. She turned to Daniel and said something that the people closest to them clearly heard. Something about what she had been promised, about what she had agreed to, about whether any of this still made sense. Now, her voice had lost its earlier ease. Mrs. Harrington reached for her daughter's arm. Mr. Harrington looked around the room with the expression of a man searching for an exit that no longer existed. Jennifer straightened. When she spoke again, her voice was shaking but deliberate. "If what was promised is no longer there, then there is nothing here for me either." No one argued with her. No one moved to stop her. Daniel stood alone in the middle of what had been his wedding. I looked at my son. I want to be clear about what I saw. I did not see a villain. I saw a man who had been avoiding hard things for so long that all the hard things had arrived at once. In one room, in front of everyone. "Do you have anything you want to say?" I asked him. He opened his mouth. then closed it, then slowly shook his head. The Harrington family left without goodbyes. Jennifer followed without looking back. Her dress trailed along the floor of a room that no one was watching anymore. The remaining guests sat very still, the kind of still that comes after something real has happened in a space that was only designed for performance. Daniel walked toward me slowly. His voice was low. "I was wrong. I'll make it right. Please just give me time." I looked at my son for a long moment. "I'm not removing your future," I said. "I'm taking back what belongs to me." I turned to Margaret. She stood up. We didn't need to discuss anything. All the decisions had been made hours earlier in a quiet living room with a cup of tea and a phone. We walked out together. No victory music, no sense of triumph. Just the quiet, heavy feeling of something that had been going wrong for a long time finally stopping. We didn't go home right away. I booked 2 nights at a small inn near the water. Margaret needed fresh air and open space. I needed somewhere quiet enough to think without the house reminding me of everything. Every morning I made tea and sat at the window watching the boats on the water. The city had given me a career and a good life. But standing at that window, I understood something clearly. Everything of real value eventually has to be returned to its proper place. I called Robert again, not about a crisis. I told him I wanted to list the lake house. He was quiet for a moment. "Are you sure?" "Yes," I said. That house had been held in my heart for Daniel. But I understood now what I hadn't understood before. A gift that comes with conditions, even unspoken ones, is never really a gift. It's an expectation, and expectations handed to people who aren't ready for them become pressure they quietly resent. Margaret and I talked about what to do with the money. We decided to set up a small education fund, not under my name, under hers, for young people in our community who needed a real door opened for them. When I told Margaret, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "If someone gets further because of this, that's more than enough." My phone filled up with missed calls in the weeks that followed. Daniel called, multiple times. I didn't answer. Not from anger. I want to be honest about that. I didn't answer because I knew that if I picked up too early, I would go back to being his safety net before he had learned anything from falling. Some lessons don't land until the person is standing without anything underneath them. One quiet evening, a short message came through. "I understand now. I'm truly sorry." I read it. I set the phone down. I didn't reply. Some apologies need time to become real before they're ready to be answered. Margaret got stronger. She walked every morning, slow at first, then steadier. One afternoon, she held my hand on the path near the water and said, "I feel lighter." She wasn't only talking about her health, neither was I. I no longer spent energy calculating how my choices might land for someone else's image. I no longer moved quietly around my own life to avoid taking up space in someone else's plan. One afternoon, my phone lit up with a number I recognized. I looked at it. I put it back in my pocket without answering, no hesitation, no guilt sitting heavy in my chest afterward. Margaret noticed. She didn't ask anything. She just smiled. I thought about Daniel often during those weeks. I thought about every decision I had made as his father, the school fees, the opportunities I created, the doors I opened quietly without ever asking for acknowledgement. I had spent 30 years making sure he had every possible advantage, and somewhere in all of that, I had forgotten one thing. Giving someone everything they need to succeed is not the same as teaching them to be grateful for it. That gap, that space between providing and teaching, was my failure too. I can hold that honestly. I am not without responsibility in how things turned out, but I also know this. Accepting your part in something does not mean continuing to fund the parts that hurt you. Love is not the same thing as unlimited protection. Sometimes the most honest thing a parent can do is step back and let the consequences of someone's choices find them. That is not cruelty. That is respect. Respect for the fact that your child is a grown person who must eventually carry their own weight. The education fund was finalized in early autumn. We attended a small gathering where the first recipient was announced. No spotlight, no formal speeches, just a room of people who cared about the outcome. A young woman came forward to receive the first award. She was the first in her family to attend university. She shook Margaret's hand with both of hers and said, "Thank you," in a voice that meant it completely. Margaret squeezed my hand so hard I felt it in my shoulder. I didn't say anything. I just thought quietly that maybe this was always the gift we were meant to give. Not the lake house, not the money. This, a door opening for someone who had been standing in front of a wall. That evening we drove back into the city as the lights were coming on. I stood at the window of our home and looked at the street below for a long time. People moving, cars passing, the ordinary rhythm of a city that doesn't pause for anyone's private turning points. I didn't feel the need to keep pace with it anymore. Before going to bed, I checked my phone one last time. Nothing new. I set it on the table, turned off the lamp. Margaret was already asleep. Her breathing was calm and even. I lay in the dark and realized something I don't think I had felt in a very long time. I wasn't planning anything for tomorrow that had to do with managing my son's life. I wasn't calculating what he needed, or what impression he was making, or what I could do quietly in the background to make things easier for him. I was thinking about Margaret, about the morning walk we had planned, about the tea I would make while she was still sleeping, about the simple, honest pleasure of a day that belonged to us. Some connections, when they finally release, don't leave behind an open wound. They leave behind open space. Space that is clean and quiet and finally yours. Space wide enough to walk into something new, something lighter, something true. Something that was always meant to be yours if you had only been willing to stop holding everything else up long enough to reach for it. If you stayed with this story until the very end, thank you. Thank you for listening with patience. Thank you for giving this the time it deserved. If something in this story stayed with you, if it made you think about your own life or your own family or the lines you've been afraid to draw, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Because the message I want to leave you with is simple. What you give to others has value, but what you allow to be taken from you tells a different story. Boundaries are not walls. They are the foundation of every relationship that actually lasts. Family is a place to return to, not a place to disappear inside of. And you, the person who spent their whole life showing up for everyone else, you deserve a chapter that finally belongs to you. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next one.